We have media in Slovakia, we have NGOs in Slovakia that were paid by the USAID, and they were respecting and they were fulfilling American interests. So I'm very much happy that this institution was abolished. Ukraine is misused. The West has a strategy to use the war in Ukraine to weaken Russia. If you just think you can beat Russia through conventional warfare, that's not going to happen. We need our own strategy, our own strategy beneficial to Europe, not a strategy which is beneficial to Washington. The fact that the Americans want to negotiate with Russia first, this is quite responsible. We need to talk, and the EU should be helping with this process and not whine about why are we not sitting behind this table.
Mr. Prime Minister, it's a pleasure to speak to you, sir. Thank you for making the time.
Ďakujem aj ja za túto príležitosť, pretože
Thank you for this opportunity, being able to talk to a journalist who's trying to be objective when talking about the world. In Slovakia, it's not very common.
Especially with the revelations we saw with USAID and Doge and the funding that the media has been receiving here from I think it's USAID and Soros-backed NGOs, is that correct?
First of all, I would like to talk about the agency which supported a lot of initiatives in Europe. And when you look at the first sentence that was written in just about any contract that was signed with an NGO or with a media organization in Slovakia, always they said these media, these NGOs have to promote American interests. And that's very strange, right? We have media in Slovakia, we have NGOs in Slovakia that were paid by the USAID, and they were respecting and they were fulfilling American interests. So I'm very much happy that this institution was abolished. Basically, you know that I wrote a letter to Mr. Musk, and I was asking him to provide to us further information about everybody who was on that list. From public sources you can get some information, but if you get more detailed information, if we could get more detailed information, that would be very nice. We would be very grateful. But if I may, I'm not an expert when it comes to American politics. I don't want to be an expert when it comes to American politics, so I monitor everything, I follow everything with some detachment, with a lot of respect, and I would like to emphasize we should never intervene in the internal affairs of another country. That's my philosophy. I have been following this philosophy for the 33 years that I've been in politics. It doesn't matter what country we're talking about. Is it China? Is it the US? Is it anyone else? Everybody has the right to select how they want to run their country.
I do want to go back to the revelations with USAID funding to different NGOs and the interference here in Slovakia. Did those revelations come as a surprise to you?
Is that for a long time we knew that Slovak media, especially those that are anti-government, that have expressed themselves in an anti-Slovak way, are funded from abroad. We have one influential daily newspaper, for example, in Slovakia. Doesn't matter what the title is, because to an international viewer that doesn't really matter, they don't know them. But it's a daily newspaper which is half owned by the structure of Soros funded organizations. So how can they be objective? How can they work if half the money that the journalists get there come there from Soros, basically? And the same goes for other types of media. We have the Open Society Foundation, Real Transparency International, and so on. So we're not surprised that the money was coming in from abroad when it comes to these NGOs, but the question is, what was the volume of money? That was quite a lot of money, right? And we're also surprised that many of these NGOs, many of these media outlets were obliged to fulfill the interests of the United States. How can you be a Slovak media organization that can fulfill that is fulfilling the interests of the United States? Why do we need media like that? They were funded in this way. That doesn't surprise us as such, but the volume, that's what's surprising, the volume of money, and how they were obliged to follow certain interests when it comes to the
I was just in Romania, and before that I was in Poland, interviewing leaders there, and one of the common narratives is the amount of influence Soros-backed NGOs had in those countries. Mr. Georgescu, who should be president in Romania, but is not because the election was cancelled, he said on day one, the first thing he will do is expel any Soros-backed NGO. So my question to you as a leader, how could non-government organizations have so much influence in another country?
Mimovládne organizácie by som rozdelil na dve kategórie.
NGOs. I would like to divide in two categories. The first category is, useful NGOs. That's what I call them. The ones that do useful work. Somebody wants to help out those in need, people who are poor. You want to help somebody. You want to be somebody who protects the nest of an ego, for example. Let's talk about these organizations and let's talk with them. And if they do something useful, let's support them. Why not? But there are also the other type of organizations which are purely political. They're doing what political parties should be doing. You can't replace that task unless you want to participate in elections, unless you want to carry political responsibility for what you do, for your work. So talking about some NGOs in Slovakia, these are purely political organizations which act as political subjects and participate in the political fight, let's say. They're attacking the government, they're using the same methods as the political parties that we have in the opposition, but they don't carry that responsibility in elections. And coming back to some countries which are adopting specific laws to discover the funding of this organization. There are some laws, there is legislation even in the US or in other countries which label organizations that take money from abroad. They call them foreign agents. Basically, this is a label which perhaps in Slovakia is considered in a negative way because of our past. Basically, when you talk about agents, you're thinking about communist secret services, agents of that type, right? But even in Slovakia, we're thinking about why not support those useful NGOs and those who carry out political activities. We will force them to say where their money is coming from, because if you have an NGO which attacks the Slovak government, then we can say, well, I'm sorry, but this is a foreign-backed organization. In Slovakia, we say that you should be singing the song of the person whose bread you're eating. It's a bit clumsy, but that's what we say. So when talking about Romania, I'm really disappointed that the EU calmly respected the cancellation of the first round of the presidential election. I was also very much disappointed regarding what happened in Georgia. The moment that somebody wins the election that was supposed to win the election, so immediately the person is attacked and steps are taken which are unprecedented. How can you just cancel the first round of the presidential election and then pretend that everything is okay? That's the problem of European democracy. That's why the Vice President of the US was correct when he was speaking at the Munich Security Conference. He said, you have a problem with values. I don't think he was talking about cultural, ethical issues. I think he was precisely talking about how the democratic system is not working properly. The moment that somebody wins who's not supposed to win, then that person needs to be challenged or liquidated. The moment you have a different opinion than the mainstream opinion, then you need to be punished. I've been the subject of this for 3 years when it comes to Ukraine. From the first day I had a different opinion than that one single obligatory opinion of the EU.
So do you agree with J.D. Vance's comment that the biggest threat comes from the abandonment of European values rather than external forces like Russia? Obviously, he also talks about censorship and about the cancelled elections in Romania. But essentially, he's talking about how the biggest threat for the EU is from within more than neighboring Russia, which is at war with Ukraine. Do you agree with that statement?
What the Vice President said was quite shocking to many people. when we are the ones who are saying this, prime ministers of small European countries, okay, the people will say, that's just a small country, it's just a prime minister of a small country. But when it's the vice president of the United States, when it's him who says it, then suddenly that's very powerful. And he also used the forum of the Munich Security Conference to say this. So that was like a big mass, basically. And when somebody tells you the truth at an event like that, so yeah, for the long term, I've been talking about specific issues, and I'm happy to be responsible for them. So really, in a long term, Europe fell in love with itself, especially the EU. The EU thinks that it's the most beautiful, the best organization, and there's nothing in the world that could be better than the EU. We have adopted the Lisbon strategy. I think it was adopted in 2000, if I'm not mistaken, and it was supposed to make the EU by 2010 the best region in the world when it comes to work, when it comes to life, and so on. But in 2010, we found out that we were overtaken. We have been overtaken by other countries, other regions of the world. So we took the entire Lisbon strategy, we put it in the basket. Then we had new legislation, the Green Deal, and so on. And it was as if the EU was losing sense of reality. They feel as if they're the ones who should be dictating everybody else what the world should look like. How can it dictate China how they should be running in their internal affairs? You should congratulate them. They have 1.5 billion people, and it's a stable country. Stable inward, and it is stabilizing when it comes to the entire region. Another issue in the EU is how you approach democracy. You have to have the same opinion as the big ones, the major ones want you to have. Otherwise, you have a problem. Why do we have a black sheep in Slovakia and in Hungary, black sheep of the family? Why is that? Because we're saying our opinions in an open manner. Even though what J.D. Vance said was felt as shocking by many, it was certainly very useful, I think. It was useful for the EU as such. You have to go through a process of self-reflection. I support this project. I want to emphasize that. I'm not somebody who wants to break up to you. Certainly not. But I think that the EU needs to wake up, it needs to self-reflect, and it also needs to adopt some decisions that will also give a chance to different countries to show their national face, let's say. So let's talk about the red line of canceling the veto right in the EU. There are some areas where every single member state has the right to veto something, and they're already talking about removing this right to veto decisions so that the majority can decide and everybody else must follow. I support the EU very much. I don't want to give you examples from other countries, so I will give you an example from Slovakia. If you look at Slovakia before 2004 and after 2004, when we entered the EU, entering the EU for Slovakia was something very positive. The country was developing rapidly. We were using European funds, cohesion funds, where we can draw quite a lot of money. This is a peace project as well. I'm also very unhappy that it is now into a war project. Some of the European councils that I attended were not really meetings of the European Council. They were war cabinets. How much ammunition? How do you prolong the war? And so on. So I will do everything that I can within the limits of Slovakia's power, obviously, which is not great. It's a small country, but certainly I want to emphasize that the EU is our life space. We have a lot of integration there. We are using the euro as our currency. We are part of the Schengen zone. There are some other countries, such as the Czech Republic, that don't use the euro, for example. So we have very much integrated in the EU. So we should thank Mr. Vance for what he said. It was a good warning.
But it seems other leaders were very shocked by two things that you said you're not shocked by. First, what J.D. Vance said a couple of days ago, but also Trump being elected as president. You said that did not come as a surprise to you. I do want to make some stark comparisons to you and President Trump. You were shot 5 times, 2 months before President Trump got shot. You both seek peace with Russia, an end to the war, along with Prime Minister Orban. And you were both targeted by various NGOs and the EU, especially in your case. My question to you is, first, why does it seem like anybody that opposes, loose immigration laws focuses on their country first, which you'd expect from a leader, or is seeking peace in Ukraine, a very pragmatic solution to a never-ending war? It seems that immediately they're being targeted and labeled in a certain way, pro-Russian, extreme right. Why is that? Is that like a new strategy by the establishment if someone disagrees with their policies?
I think it's rather a lack of arguments, as if we are not very good at discussing things in a democratic way. At European Councils, for example, we have tried for a number of times to discuss the real military situation in Ukraine, and I was told that's not really correct to talk about what the reality of the military conflict in Ukraine is. Or I asked about corruption in Ukraine, as well as money in Ukraine, and I was told that's not politically correct to talk about corruption in Ukraine. But when something happens in Slovakia, suddenly it is discussed within the EU. But what you were really asking about is certainly correct. I will give you one example, my example, so that I don't misuse or abuse the examples of other prime ministers or other politicians. I don't know if you can imagine this, but in 2020 to 2023, when my party was in opposition, I was accused 4 times of criminal activity. Every single accusation had to do with political criminal activity, not economic criminal activity. Going to the extreme, I was organizing a public protest in accordance with the law, and 5 minutes before that protest was about to start, a bunch of police officers showed up. I was arrested and I was taken to a police station so that I could not participate in that political protest. We were screaming about that as an EU member state. We were asking the EU, please come and have a look at what's going on. People were dying while in custody. Nobody cared about it in the EU. People were jailed without legal reasons for that existing. But the EU was silent. You know why? Because there was a government in Slovakia which respected the only possible obligatory political opinion, sending weapons for Ukraine. The government that was here in that period of time sent just about everything to Ukraine. Our stocks are now empty. They sent aircraft, the S-300 system, which is an anti-missile system, and basically we remained naked. But the EU was happy because they had a government which was compliant in everything. Then 2023 came around, we won the election, even though they tried to jail me. I had those 4 criminal prosecutions and so on. It looked like they didn't know what to do. But now I'm talking about Slovakia's political scene, just to make sure. They didn't know what to do in Slovakia. And the assassination attempt that I survived in 2024, in May 2024, was politically motivated. One of the assassins said so. He said that I had a different opinion of the war in Ukraine and so on. Plus, this is a man who is directly connected to one particular political party in Slovakia. So he's a 100% political activist. So I'm not saying the EU is tolerating it, but it's ignoring it. They want to be left alone. We have a government here that is compliant. If that's the case, they can do whatever they want. We had a person in custody, a lawyer who died in custody. A lawyer who he got jailed because there was some suspicion of some criminal activity on his part, and he got COVID. While in there, he wasn't given, he wasn't provided primary health care, and he suffocated while in jail. It happened in 2023. Nobody cared if this is something that happened right now. deadly. Our government, or let's say we send a political commando to a protest that the opposition is organizing, and 5 minutes before the start of that rally, we detain the leader of the opposition. I don't know what the EU would do with Slovakia, what would happen. Something major for sure. So yes, it's a double standard, it's very dangerous, and you need to wake up. If this double standard is to continue, the EU will have major problems going forward because others will speak up. Maybe at the moment it's Viktor Orban, at the moment it's Robert Fico, but maybe others will join. Because what do you think the German election will end up like? Nobody else for sure. As we'll see soon enough. What about the Czech Republic? Mr. Babiš is ahead in the polls in the Czech Republic, and you probably know that he's of Slovak nationality, right? That's not very common to see that a Slovak person, a person of Slovak ethnicity, is leading the politics in another country. So the political map can change quite a bit. Not respecting democratic laws, that's a major disease of the EU right now. I've been talking about this for quite a few years now. We're talking about it in the years 2020 to 2023. We were writing open letters, we were protesting, but unfortunately, so far, the EU has not woken up. And that's why I believe that what Mr. Vance said will be a wake-up call for the entire EU. We cannot just respond to what the American Vice President said by saying, oh, that's not very nice, not nice what he said, it's not polite. The main organizer of the conference, they started crying. People are helpless. You know, if the organizer starts crying, he's feeling sorry because somebody criticized Europe, the European Union, for something. That's strange, right? Come and look at what was happening in Slovakia in those previous years so that you know what I'm talking about.
Talking about the German elections, I do want to reference a quote by ex-EU Commissioner Thierry Breton, who said, what was done in Romania may be needed in Germany. For me, when I first read that, I'm like, that must be wrong for him to say that openly, to say that publicly. This just seems very... In Europe, they've become very overt about the way they go against what democracy stands for. When you saw that statement, did that worry you that the fight could continue in the EU and they could do something similar in other countries as they did in Romania?
Before returning to this particular question, I will give you another example. From the very beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, I was saying that Ukraine is misused. The West has a strategy to use the war in Ukraine to weaken Russia. That was an obvious strategy. In April 2022, there were peace agreements on the table, which Ukraine was ready to sign. But the West told it not to, because everybody believed that we would be supporting Ukraine financially, politically, and so on. Sanctions would be introduced against Russia, and at the end of the day, Russia will lose. I'm certainly more of an expert when it comes to Russian reality than when it comes to American reality. And, you know, if the Russians are kneeling, it's just because they're tying their shoelaces. So if you just think you can beat Russia through conventional warfare, that's not going to happen. That's not real. And suddenly I hear the General Secretary through the General of NATO, Mr. Rutte, the former Dutch Prime Minister, who said the West is not losing the war in Ukraine, just the front line is not moving in the right direction. So he said exactly that the West is happy for the war to continue. It's just that the front line is moving in the opposite direction. So it's not Ukraine pushing out Russia, but the other way around. And we also hear this when it comes to political systems. Let's come back to the case of Georgia, even though that is not a member state of the EU. I like how the Georgian government responded to the pressure that was created right after the party that wasn't supposed to win won. I met the Georgian Prime Minister in Brussels. He was quite unhappy that the EU is critical. So I told him, why did you win the election? You shouldn't have won. Somebody else should have won, and everything would be fine, dandy. But they responded in a different way. And if Romania was ignored in this way, We said it's perfectly normal for somebody to win the first round of the presidential election and win it in a way which suggests that that person could win the second round as well. And we just cancel the first round and everybody's celebrating. This is how you should treat the issue of different opinions. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if something similar happened in other countries as well. I don't know what the next election in Slovakia will look like. I've been in politics for 33 years. And as the president or the chairman of this political party, I have won 5 elections. This is the 4th government that I'm leading. I have the ambition to win the next election as well and to again around the next government. But when I see what's happening in the streets, how these protests are funded, or the people who are out in the streets, it's some people from Georgia who organized the Maidan in Ukraine in 2014, who organized the Maidan in Georgia as well, and now they're here. We have more information that will be published soon. So I'm worried about what will happen when we, or if we win another election. Maybe something similar will happen to what happened in the Romania or Georgia, and somebody will say, we don't respect the outcome of the election because somebody who was not supposed to win won. And it's a big European problem, and what happened in Romania, I think, is acceptable. We cannot just ignore it. Okay, this first round of the election was abolished or cancelled. Unfortunately, that's the situation in Europe right now.
Before I ask you about the latest developments when it comes to the peace negotiations regarding Ukraine, I do want to go back to, it's a more personal question. Again, you were shot 5 times. Can you tell me more about that day and if that has changed you? Some people say President Trump became a new man after he was almost shot in the head.
I have heard many different stories about how I've changed since then, that I've become a monster after the assassination attempt, but nobody's talking about the event itself. I don't want to go back to the details of what happened on that day. I warned the audience repeatedly before the 15th of May 2024 that it's just a question of time before a member of the government is physically attacked. I warned our ministers at our meetings, be careful, be cautious, don't go into large crowds. The atmosphere is quite tense. It's so tense, so nervous that something might happen, somebody might do something, and it didn't occur to me that it might be me who would be the first victim of an attempt like that. And I cannot rule out, given what the atmosphere in our societies also brought about by these protests, that something like this might happen again. So it was a day like any other. I was outside of Bratislava. I was going to shake some hands, which I always do. I still do it to this day. And suddenly, instead of shaking somebody's hand, I got a different gift, a different present than a hand. Luckily, physically speaking, I'm doing very well. And I was doing well. I'm quite fit. I'm quite healthy. And the doctors said that that's why I survived that assassination attempt, because I was really fit at that time. But I can tell you that the only thing that remained is I'm more cautious than I used to be. So when I go into crowds, I look around, which I think is quite natural. I look around more than I used to. But I don't think that I personally have become, more hateful, more vengeful. I have said I forgive the attacker. I said it publicly. I said that guy is really a no one. He's a zero. He was misused politically. He was in an atmosphere where he was, when he heard that fitness to be taken care of in another way than just through elections. So I forgave him. He was just a person that pulled the trigger, but the atmosphere around him that was created by the media, by NGOs, by political parties. So I don't even am a participant in the criminal proceedings. I'm not even asking for any damages from him. So it's all over for me. But really, it's just a lesson that shows you that from too much political activism that we saw in 2023 to other types of discreditation. We then moved on to physical attempts to liquidate somebody, and Trump saw the same thing as well. Can you imagine? I'll just tell you one interesting thing. As the leader of the opposition, I was the leader of the opposition at some time, and I had regular meetings with lawyers where we prepared our defense. Because there were different criminal proceedings against us, so we worked on our strategy. Because there was a suggestion that I might have been a poacher. So because of animal poaching, they installed cameras in a room where we were meeting. So this was official state policy in 2020, 2023, and they recorded tens of hours of our, or dozens of hours of our meetings. And you can open any Slovak media organization and you can have fun looking at the leader of the opposition talking to 3 lawyers, 4 lawyers. It's all recorded. It's all out in the open. Everybody can access it. Nobody cares about it. Nobody cares in the EU. And of course, in Slovakia, nobody cares that this happened either. So we're not going in the right direction. Of course, I too am partly responsible for the state that Slovakia is in. So I have been Prime Minister 4 times now. But I don't agree that it's me who's responsible for myself, for what happened on that fateful day. I somehow made it happen. I deserved it, you know. This is the type of stuff that was said. And I will be very happy if this criminal issue of the assassination attempt is solved. I don't know what the court decision will be, but I will be very happy if this is something that's never repeated again. But unfortunately, I think that the atmosphere in Slovakia is still so tense, so bad, that it's just a question of time before a similar attack happens again. It doesn't have to be an assassination attempt against a member of the government. It can be an attack on a number, or on a group of people, attacking in a cinema or in a restaurant, somewhere else. I think this will happen because when you look at the aggression out in the streets, when anti-government opposition protests are organized, and I repeat, there are people from Georgia who are directly linked to those who run these protests. The people who organized Maidan in Ukraine or in Georgia, they are linked with our organizers.
One other question, Mr. Prime Minister, is talking about assassination attempts. What was your first thought when you saw Trump shot in the ear? And a more important question, how do you think the world would look like today if Trump did not turn his head when that bullet was coming?
I don't know if we've born under a lucky star together with President Trump. You need to realize that the shooter shot me from just 1 meter away, and he shot me 5 times. I survived, and same way we were watching or we saw videos or photos from the assassination attempt against President Trump. He had a lot of luck. Maybe this lucky star is something that's connected with our lives. I do not want to talk about what the world would look like, but, well, I mean, someone else would probably win the presidential election, someone from the opposition party, and we know what their opinion of the war in Ukraine is. I couldn't either support or be against President Trump because that's an internal U.S. issue as to who they choose as their president. But I was very impressed by what he said before the elections, that he would end the war within the first 24 hours. And knowing what I knew from his first term, I knew that he would try to really stand by this promise. Obviously, you cannot end a war in 24 hours. That this was your classical pre-election venture, but I really appreciate that he really went for it. He is the driver of what will happen with the conflict in Ukraine, and I'm rather surprised by this nervous behavior by some EU leaders. Where are we? Where are we? Why are we not sitting behind this table? We belong there. Well, gentlemen from Western Europe, you supported the war. You were the ones pushing arms to Ukraine. You wanted the war to go on. When we had the European Council with President Zelensky, we asked, well, could we at least have a Christmas feast for you? And the response was that ceasefire is for the weak ones. So I kept asking why we can't talk about ending the war. The response was that Ukraine is too weak to negotiate peace. And how many people have to die for Ukraine to be strong enough to talk about ending the war? Yes, the world would look very differently. War would go on. I did not doubt this for a second that if someone else were leading the US today from the other party, the war today, there would be even more oil poured into the war conflict than what we can imagine.
You met President Putin, I think it was last year. It was only the two EU leaders that met the president were yourself and Prime Minister Orban. Can you tell me more about that meeting? What was discussed? What was President Putin's mood like?
Predovšetkým musíte...
Well, first and foremost, you need to know that being stubborn, that's maybe the best word. I'm stubbornly fighting for sovereign policy of Slovakia, sovereign and oriented to all four parts of the world, or for directions. This is the basis. I lived in Czechoslovakia, and we were told that we would stand by the USSR forever. And then we were being told that we will stand by the West and the USA forever and ever. These are two extreme points that I refuse. We have north, south, east, west, so no one can tell me where I can go, whether I go to China, to Russia, to Brazil, or anywhere else. This is the framework within which my meeting with President Putin took place. I met him several times. Obviously, this visit happened during the sensitive time period, but I did not care about whether this was a sensitive time period or not. I had the opportunity to meet with the President of Russia, so I made use of it. And I was, I believe, correct enough because I talked with the head of the EU Commission and with Antonio Costa, and I said, Antonio Ursula, I'm going to Moscow. I'll be meeting with the Russian president so that we can avoid all this yelling, because when President Orban met with Putin in China, he was a target of a lot of criticism, which is ridiculous, really. So, first of all, I want to say that we discussed two things. It was about a supply of gas, because it was clear that Zelensky was about to take very silly decisions on stopping the transit of gas through Ukraine. And then the second topic was the war in Ukraine, where the Russian president really tried to explain to me the essentials of the conflict, the historic roots of the conflict, and I heard what I heard from across the Atlantic. So one thing is that, yes, there is a breach of international law, but it's true that the use of American forces in Iraq was a breach of international law. So we should be clear about this. Is it a breach? It's a breach, yes. But at the same time, we have to say that there were such reasons. Russia was being lied to for a long time in terms of enlargement of NATO. So Russian leaders said probably that, well, enough is enough. Even if it's a breach of international law, we will be safeguarding our internal interests. This is the logic that I understood as it was explained to me by President Putin. And then the issue of supply of the gas, and they do not like to hear this in Europe. Russia has always been a reliable and responsible gas supplier or energy supplier, whether it was gas or oil. And we talked about what would happen when there is no more transit of gas through Ukraine. what happened was exactly what we predicted. Once natural gas stopped coming into Europe, the prices of natural gas went up. We had an increase of liquefied natural gas coming to Europe from the US, and today it's even more ridiculous because Zelensky is abusing European legislation, and we now have natural gas going from Europe to Ukraine, which again puts pressure on the increase of gas prices. So because Zelensky is buying Russian gas, he is sort of financing Russia's war attempts, for which we were criticized greatly, and I have to appreciate the position of President Putin. It's just like the president of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan. We have to be looking for other options because Gazprom has a contract with European and Slovak companies. But how are they just supposed to deliver the gas if Ukraine refuses to let this gas pass through transit? So we are looking for a solution, Turk Stream. We are looking for finances to enlarge the Turk Stream pipelines, which would enable us to deliver more gas, more volume. But my conclusion is that we will never have the accessible gas prices if we want to cut off Russian energy completely. That's impossible. You cannot have 1 megawatt hour of gas costing more than 60 euros. How are we supposed to compete with the US if 1 megawatt hour is 8 or 9 euros in the US? So within the EU, our natural gas is 6 or 7 times expensive, but this is our fault because we were supporting this Zelensky's nonsense, and at the same time we're saying that we want to be competitive with the US. How can you be competitive with these price differences? So I met several times with Mr. Putin, and I had a feeling that he was a very maybe not self-confident, but he knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew exactly how it would end. He probably couldn't have known what would happen immediately after the new US president took term, but essentially all the Russian goals are being met. They're controlling the area they want to control. The USA said that Ukraine would not be a NATO member, which is something I said I've been saying as well. There's no place for Ukraine in the NATO, and Ukraine will be the biggest loser in all of this. So Ukraine will lose part of its territory. Ukraine will not be in the NATO, and what's most interesting is that there will be foreign army troops at the territory of Ukraine. So if this is what Zelensky fought for, even though he had many opportunities for peace and ceasefire, that he was being pushed by the West, and I think that the militant part of the West abused Ukraine because they thought that they could fight like this against Russia, but it didn't work.
A lot of people are just making a joke that what you and Prime Minister Orban have been saying for a long time and criticized for has now become like the popular narrative, and Trump is getting all the credit when you guys have been saying the same thing for much longer. I do want to go back to another comment that Prime Minister Orban made, and I think he did it in his interview with Tucker Carlson. He said, "Everyone says we have a problem called Russia, which is true, but soon we will have another problem called Ukraine." First, what do you think the Prime Minister meant by the statement? And second, do you agree with the statement?
Ja si pána premiéra Orbána veľmi vážim, pretože
I have a lot of respect for Prime Minister Orban. He's a very capable politician, and I appreciate how much he defends Hungarian national interests. Really, this is something to admire. He's very responsible in this term. And he rumbled that, yes, I did so much to tell this to the world that no one was listening, that then the President Trump came and he said it all in just one day. I understand him because Viktor Orban built his whole political career on sovereign and confident Hungarian politics. But I think he was partially joking because he normally says that we used to be the black sheep of the family, but now we are the mainstream. We're the mainstream in Hungary, and we will determine what the world will look like. Ukraine, like I've mentioned already, will not be a NATO member, which is one of the best news we could have for Europe. Ukrainian NATO membership would mean the possibility of a third world war. Imagine that in Russia would be Ukraine's neighbor with this level of tension in our relationships. Imagine something happens and we apply Article 5 of NATO, which means that if any member of NATO is attacked, all the members will come to its help, and this would immediately lead to World War III. So the best news is that Ukraine will not be a NATO member. This is the basic prerequisite for stability in the region. Then I think Ukraine as a state is in a catastrophic situation. If I said this in the EU, several prime ministers would say that this is politically inappropriate, but this is a country which is rotting with corruption. We should be open huge amounts of money going to Ukraine just got lost. It got lost with the corruption machinery present in Ukraine. I'm very curious about what the political system will look like. I think it's very right that Ukraine needs to have democratic parliamentary elections. I'm very curious about what that could look like. We're prepared to help as much as we can. You might have that Slovakia refuses to give military aid to Ukraine, but we do have joint government meetings, negotiations. We do have understanding our electricity. We have a system which makes sure that when Ukraine loses electricity, Slovakia is capable of providing electricity within 30 minutes and start off the whole system. And we have other great projects. We have great relationship with the Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal. And the most important question is what the political system of Ukraine will look like, how they will face corruption. I'm talking about the post-war situation. How the public will face the possibility of foreign army being present in their territory. And then the most important moment is the EU membership of Ukraine. And you will see many paradoxes. I've been very critical of Ukraine, even though we help them. But I very much absolutely support the entry of Ukraine in the EU. And those who supported Ukraine and said you should fight, they will be the first ones who will disagree with the idea of Ukraine becoming an EU member state, because it's always about the money, because everyone will make some financial calculations. What will it mean for the EU when we have to share our money with Ukraine? What will it mean for the common agricultural policy? Will the French, German, Polish farmers have less money? What will happen with the cohesion policy? These are the funds that will be might be used in Ukraine. So I think Ukraine will go through a shock. So this is the first shock because they allow themselves to be misused for this war against Russia. And the second shock will come when they see how unwilling the big EU member states are to accept Ukraine as an EU member state. So again, we support Ukraine's membership in the EU because as a neighbor, because we share about 100 kilometers of our territory with Ukraine, we very much want Ukraine to be stable. We want this to be a country which functions normally. There are amazing opportunities for cooperation. I think EU membership will be beneficial not just for Ukraine, but for the whole of EU, but the large member states who differently, unfortunately.
What do you see a peace deal look like now that EU's been excluded from the negotiations, and do you think it was the right decision for President Trump to exclude the EU from these negotiations?
I do not like the reaction of the EU, which is very sort of weeping, whining, why are we not sitting behind the negotiation table? EU never had its own foreign policy. And again, I will mention something I've been repeating for several years. EU has always been falling behind the US government. So the US came up with the sanctions against Putin, the EU joined them. The US said this, the EU joined them. So this lack of our own European foreign policy means that suddenly we don't like anything, we cannot react to anything. Why our reaction could not have been more sobering? The EU has been called upon by myself and by Viktor Orbán. We need our own strategy, strategy beneficial to Europe, not a strategy which is beneficial to Washington. And now we have a president who is against the war, and everyone is shocked because they haven't been invited to sit behind the negotiation table, but Europe supporting the war. And Europe said even if the US stops supporting Ukraine, it could be the EU who will take over the responsibility for financing the war in Ukraine. So what is the EU expecting now? Do you expect to be invited? You wanted war and suddenly now you want peace, because now we have a new American president who said that he would end the war within the first 24 hours. So I feel like this is the sort of reaction is very whiny. This is a very strong continent. We have 500 million inhabitants in Europe, can achieve more than just to whine about not sitting behind the negotiation table. And I'm very curious about what happens when there is an offer for peace, proposal of agreement between the countries, and if the EU find that it's not quite what they imagine, what will happen then? Will the EU say that they will still support Ukraine and further war? I think that there are a lot of surprises still in store for us, but the fact that the Americans want to negotiate with Russia first, I think that's quite normal. That's perfectly normal. This is quite responsible. These countries need security safeguards. We need to talk, and the EU should be helping with this process and not whine about.
It's crazy to me that one of the most basic requirements for just diplomacy is to meet other leaders. And in this case, you've been vilified for meeting President Putin. Again, you were the black sheep. Now you've become the mainstream. So congratulations for becoming the mainstream, sir. The last question I have to you is, I made a post last night. I was a bit tired. I probably shouldn't have done it. But you know, when you believe something, and I'm sure you could relate to that, when you believe something, even if it's an unpopular opinion, you'd say it. And you know, you've done that multiple times, and it's proven to be right. And my post yesterday, and you might disagree with it, was that I believe in the foreseeable future, there's a possibility that the US and the EU, but for now the US and Russia will again become allies. I know it's hard to imagine that considering where we are today, but geopolitically it makes sense, especially with Trump's focus on China, which is the US's main rival. Do you think, considering how fast things are moving, and considering historically enemies have become allies, look at World War II, look at Japan, Germany, do you think there's a plausible possibility that the US and Russia could become allies again in the near future?
I greatly appreciate, my dear colleague, that you are talking about being rivals and not about being enemies. Because there is a huge difference between being rivals and being enemies. We've been describing Russia as the biggest enemy in the world these past 3 years, and I'm very sorry, and this needs to be said, that some Slovak media have been talking about Russia in a very terrible way, and they are now using the same vocabulary, talking about the American president, because he's doing things that are not in line with the thought of Soros ideals. So I heard interesting statements on both sides. So if this is about being economic rivals, if this is about this the U.S. president liking tariffs and taxes and, approaching everything through the prison-like economics, and he's not thinking of using arms like previous presidents, yes, this will lead to tensions because the decision to introduce higher tariffs for Europe is leading to tensions. But this is just being rivals. It's up to us to be competitive, to be ready to do something and to be better at something than the US, and not just whine about the same things over and over again. So if we have normal relationships, a normal relationship between the US and Russia, we need to applaud that, and we need to applaud if the American administration talks with China with respect, even if we are economic rivals. Well, that's understandable, because China is a country. I mean, if you don't understand China, go there to understand, so that you understand what sort of country it is. Everyone I took to China came back with their jaws dropped because they couldn't believe what was happening in the country. Yes, being rivals, yes. Economic competitiveness, yes, but not being enemies. So I do welcome these words, and I will support them as much as possible. I want to continue in these activities. And yes, this will be very sensitive for some people. We are planning to attend the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in Moscow. They will hold a huge ceremony, because it was the former USSR who played an essential role in victory over fascism, because 21 million Europeans died in the context of World War II. And I also want to visit and give my respect to Slovak soldiers who fought in the US, the Arlington Cemetery. You might not know that one of the Pacific Ocean unit was a Slovak national. He died in Pacific Ocean, so we have a reason to go to the US to thank the Slovak soldiers who participated, to took part in the World War II. And also we want to thank the US for their help in ending World War II. So we need to respect one another. We should not turn things around. We know how the World War II happened, that the second front was opened in 1944. It was important for the end of the war, but it's true that it was the Red Army and Russia who had a critical role. So the only thing that would prevent me from visiting Moscow on May 8 and 9 would be my health, but I believe everything will go well, because I feel perfectly fit.
Prime Minister Fico, I appreciate your directness. I hope you continue playing a role in bridging that wide gap between the East and the West, between Russia and NATO. And I really appreciate you doing this interview. I know you don't do a lot of long interviews like this, so it's been an incredible pleasure speaking to you, so thank you.
Thank you very much.